Hi there, welcome to another lecture. This lecture is a continuation of chapter 3. But instead of talking about what we talked in the first part of chapter 3, which was about self concept and how we perceive ourselves, we are now discussing how other people perceive us and what we do to help influence the way other people see us. So we call this identity management. So this is still part of chapter 3. So defining identity management, we say that it's the communication strategies that people use to influence how others view them. So we're going to be discussing this concept as we go along with this lecture. But basically, it's whenever you're around another person in many different situations, identity management means you are trying to have another person view you in a particular way. And when we're all sitting in a classroom, what I say is that everybody right now, you're all engaging in identity management, even if you're just sitting there in a classroom, just sitting there. Now you're sitting at home. I don't think you're necessarily engaging in any identity management. Why? Because there is no one else interacting with you at this moment. Hopefully, there shouldn't be if you're listening to the lecture. So, probably right now, your identity management is like almost nothing. But if you were sitting in class, you might think it was almost nothing, but I would say, nope, you're doing it, and we'll talk about that. So, the characteristics of identity management. We strive to construct multiple identities. This doesn't mean that we have a mental disorder like multiple personality disorder, that for the you psychology majors, that is nothing about what I'm talking about. It just means that if you think about different people with whom you interact, you have different versions of yourself that you portray. So think about if you're at work, you may try to show yourself as a responsible worker, or as a trustworthy worker, or as a fill in the blank, as a friendly worker if you're dealing with the public, maybe. So that's the identity you have at work. Now think about if you're hanging out with your friends. Do you try to persuade yourself as the hardworking worker friend? Maybe, but that's kind of a little weird. So maybe when you're around your friends, you portray yourself as a funny person, a friendly person, a chill person. So my point is, all of us have different aspects of who we are. And depending on our goals and the situation, you're going to show different parts of yourself in different situations. So we all have different identities that we portray. Our interactions can reinforce or hinder our identity management. So if I go outside and I see one of my neighbors, and I see Megan, my neighbor, and I want Megan to see me as a friendly neighbor. I know I keep saying friendly on it's on my friendly is in my mind today. So friendly neighbor, Michelle, the friendly neighbor. So I might say, "Hey Megan, how is it going? How you doing?" If I see her from 6 feet away, I'll say, "How you doing, Megan?" If she says, "Oh Michelle, I am so mad at you. Your dog keeps coming over here and she just keeps peeing and pooping on our grass and it's killing our grass, and I'm going to call the animal control if you can't get that dog under control. I've had it. You are so rude, Michelle." Well, now that interaction I just had with Megan did not make me feel like a friendly neighbor. So that interaction hindered my identity management. Our identity management can be more deliberate or more subconscious. So when I say I see my neighbor and I want her to see me as a friendly neighbor, I'm not saying that I sit there and contemplate that before I go outside and I practice saying, "Hi, Megan. Hi, hi, hi." And oh, I hope Megan really sees me as a friendly neighbor. That's so important to me. In that situation, it would have been a more subconscious effort to be portrayed as a friendly neighbor. Oh, but let's say I were to be in another situation where I really did care what the person thought about me. Like, what could that be? Oh, I know. A job interview. So if I were on a job interview my identity management would be much more deliberate, and I'd be working harder to portray a certain image of myself. So people differ in their degree of identity management. Some people work really hard at having others see them in a particular way, and they do this in many different circumstances. Other people, it's like, take it or leave it. I am who I am. What you see is what you get. And you can be extreme on either side, and we're going to talk about being too extreme on either side of that isn't a good thing. But yes, people differ in how much effort they put into the impression that they're making, which leads us to something we call being a self-monitor. So self-monitoring refers to the process of paying close attention to one's own behavior and how it is being received, then using these observations to shape one's own behavior. So what that means is if I'm talking to you and we're at a party and I'm telling you this story about how my weekend was, and I could just tell you're bored with my story, I pick up on your feedback. Hopefully you're polite and it's sort of a nonverbal type feedback, and I cut my story short because I can see that you're not liking my story too much. That's self-monitoring, the ability to pay attention to how one is being perceived in a certain situation in a given moment. Now, people can be high self-monitors or low self-monitors. So a high self-monitor really works hard in many situations to try to make a good impression. If they're at a social gathering, they're really trying to make a good impression and they want to sound interesting and entertaining and they want to be sociable or whatever it is that they want to be perceived. They're just working harder. They get ready for a long time because they want to make sure they look really good. So we're going to talk about aspects of identity management involve how you look, what you say. So they're just working hard on every aspect to try to make that impression to another person. Low self-monitor, doesn't really care. They either don't know how or they don't really care about the impression that they're making. So sometimes you hear about someone having a low filter. It's kind of like the same idea. They just don't care. They don't even know how to make a certain impression. They're unaware, or they just choose not to. Who's to say? But it could be either one. Now, it is not good. Wait. Taking that away. It is not good if you're too high a self-monitor or if you are too low of a self-monitor. So let's discuss that. Who has some thoughts? No, just kidding. If we were in class, this is obviously a time we'd have some discussion, but here we are online. So I'll just do all the discussing for us. If you are too low of a self-monitor, that can really negatively impact your life because that means if you're at a party, you're going to be that annoying, obnoxious person at the party who's telling offensive jokes or being rude or being inappropriate, and either you don't care or you don't even realize that you're being inappropriate or rude or offensive, in which case you're not going to have too many people wanting to talk to you and be your friend. So a low self-monitor has social consequences. If you're a low self-monitor at work, well, first of all, I don't even know how you got hired if you're a low self-monitor, but if somehow you managed to get hired somewhere and now you have a job, you're not going to perform very well on the job if you're not really responding well to the feedback you're getting from others and trying to adapt. If you're not even trying to make a good impression at work because you just don't even care, unless you naturally just make a good impression because you're so marvelous, you're probably not going to do well at work either. So a low self-monitor, really low self-monitor, that can have negative consequences. Someone who just doesn't care whatsoever how they're being perceived. It's not like you don't care what people think about you. It's you don't care how you're being perceived. You don't care if you're being perceived as rude or offensive or just tacky, whatever the word is. It's like you don't even care or you don't know. A high self-monitor is also bad if you're too high. So if you are at a party just obsessing about what people think about you and the impression that you're making and how you look. And I had a friend one time who was on her way to a party and she had to go back and turn around because she was wearing black shoes and she realized she had on a brown belt. Oh my gosh. She just couldn't face the party with her brown belt and her black shoes. Do you think anyone really cared if she had on brown belt and black shoes? She was just so embarrassed. So I would say that was being too high of a self monitor. If you're so worried about what people are thinking about you in these types of social situations, that can be a problem. That can lead to a lot of anxiety in your head. And then you're never really being relaxed or yourself because you're so worried about trying to please everybody and be interesting to everybody. Another way it can backfire, and I mentioned this in the previous lecture, if I am so consumed about looking good to you when we're together at a social gathering, that means I'm really into my own head, into my own self. And I'm going to come across perhaps as quite egotistical. And are you going to like me that much if I seem like I'm really into myself and egotistical? Probably not. That's not a quality that is very attractive to other people. We don't like it when someone just seems like all they care about is what other people think and they're so into themselves. As I said in the previous lecture, we're drawn to people who make us feel good about ourselves. So if you want to seem like you're down to earth and sociable, and I said this in the last lecture, sorry for being repetitive, talk to people, ask them questions about them, not too personal, but just some questions, and then just let people talk and listen, and then ask follow-up questions and have a response to what they're saying and show interest in them and what they have to say. And you have to realize people don't walk around earth judging you and thinking about you. If you think that, you're too obsessed with yourself, and that's a problem. That's you being too high of a self-monitor. Now, if you're on a job interview, yes, you have to be a high self-monitor. That's why it is so stressful on a job interview, because we have to self-monitor so highly and we have to be so worried about the impression that we're making to the other person. But here's what you don't want to do. You do not want to treat every social situation as if it's a job interview. You don't want to do that. Okay. So, a competent communicator has the ability to self-monitor, meaning that, and communication competence is something that comes from chapter 1. In chapter 1, it gives a list of qualities of a competent communicator, and I skip that in the lecture because each of those qualities will come up in different lectures as we go along the textbook. So this is the first term that we're going to talk about from that list of chapter 1, self-monitoring. So a competent communicator has the ability to self-monitor, meaning if I'm at work, or if I'm on a job interview, or if I'm at a function and it's something where I want to be perceived in a certain way, I have the ability to monitor myself. But I'm not so crazy driving myself nuts trying to be so concerned with what every single person in every certain situation thinks about me. And I can be realistic in my self-monitoring and think, okay, so I'm going to this party. I'm going to, pay attention to what I look like. I don't want to look like a total slob. Put a little effort into that. That's self-monitoring. And when I'm at the party, I'm going to talk to some people. I'm going to engage conversation, ask some questions. That's self-monitoring. But I'm not so worried about me looking like the most interesting, funniest person on the planet, because that's just obnoxious. Okay. Why do we manage our identities? One reason is we follow social rules. So different settings tell us how to behave. So when I tell my students that are sitting in class that right now all of you are engaging in identity management, it's because every student is sitting there with their packet open with a pen, writing things down. They didn't walk in the classroom doing jumping jacks. They didn't go to the corner of the room and stand on their head. They didn't start playing a trumpet. That would be really odd behavior. I might have to call security if that happened. But people know when they're in class, you sit down, you open your notebook, you get your pen ready. That's just social rules that we all follow. So what I say is that as students, when you're sitting in class, you are trying to portray yourself, and it's sort of a subconscious thing, as a normal student. So you all know what normal students do sitting in a class. You put on an outfit, normal student outfit. You didn't wear your Halloween costume. You know, you showed up in your normal student clothes, sat in class. That's following social rules. Personal goals. The best example I can give you is job interview. You are managing your identity more highly at a job interview because you want the job. Or when you're at work and you want your boss to see you a certain way. That's smart. You have personal goals. Relational goals. So, ever been on a first date? Were you working hard for the other person to see you in a certain way? Does that mean you were lying to the person? This whole thing with identity management doesn't mean you're being, I mean, it could, but for most of us, it doesn't mean we're being deceptive. It just means that we have a lot of aspects about ourselves, and we only want to portray to certain people certain aspects of ourselves. So if I'm on a job interview, I don't want to talk about how much I like just laying around and watching Netflix. Even though I do enjoy laying around watching Netflix, that's not the part of me I want the job interviewer to know about. So when you're on a date, a first date, obviously you're going to try to just talk about things that sort of make you look good. And the parts of you that make you look not so good, hopefully you're not going to lie about those things, but you're not going to necessarily volunteer those things right away, right? Because you don't know the person. And whenever you don't know someone, people are making impressions about you, right? Another example would be once you've started dating someone, then you have to go meet this person. If they're sort of a serious person to you, you go and meet their parents. Do you try to make a good impression on the parents? That's identity management, and that's following relational goals. And if we were in class, we would be talking about all this. So sad, we're not. So how do we do it? So if you remember the definition of identity management, it's the communication strategies that we use to make a certain impression. So now we're going to discuss the specific strategies that we all have available to us to help manage the way others see us. So first is manner, which I don't like the name because it implies that it's like having good manners and putting a napkin in your lap and saying please and thank you. And it's much broader than that. It refers to anything that you say or anything that you don't say, and your nonverbal behavior, meaning anything you do or anything that you don't do. So in class, I keep the example going about meeting the parents of a significant other. And we talk about what should you say, what should you not say. And usually some of the answers that we get are, I mean, maybe I should make this a discussion question, we'll see. But some of the answers that we get are you wouldn't want to be cussing, you wouldn't want to be bad-mouthing their kid, you wouldn't want to be talking negative about much anything. And I always tell people, don't go on a soapbox. Do you know what a soapbox is? Don't start venting and rambling about anything. Because if someone doesn't know you and you get there and you start venting and rambling, that usually seems a bit annoying. So when you're new to the situation, you don't want to be silent, but you don't want to like dominate the whole conversation. And be ready to answer their questions. Yes, you're on the hot seat. So people are going to ask you questions. Don't be shocked by questions like, what's your major? What do you want to do? What do you like to do? People are asking you questions. The worst answer you can give in a situation like that, I don't know. Ugh. So people don't typically love that response. So have a response, be able to answer the basic questions about yourself that you're probably going to get asked on this dinner here. So what you say and what you don't say, really important. Show, compliment the house, compliment something. And I'll tell you, if you ask them questions, that makes you seem more sociable and more interesting. And I've already been talking a lot about this, even in this lecture, right? Asking other people questions and then showing to be a good listener. Aha, maybe ask them questions about where did they go to school, or how did they get their job, or what kind of industry do they work in. Ask intelligent questions and then listen. Mm-hmm. And then nonverbal actions, what you do, what you don't do. So the worst thing you can do, you're sitting at dinner with these parents. Do you pull this out? Please do not pull this out. Please keep this far, far away. If you want to make a good impression at a job interview or meeting people, keep this away. Keep your phone away. It makes a terrible impression. Certain things you do just make terrible impression. Same thing, we're going to talk about punctuality in another lecture, but if you're supposed to be at a job interview or at someone's house for a dinner where you're meeting them and it's kind of important, don't be late. Again, you're going to make a terrible impression if you're late. How we look contributes to the impression that we're making. So again, you're going to meet the parents. Think about what you're wearing. It might look odd if you are completely dressed up like you're going to a prom, but you don't want to look too casual, too sloppy, too like risque. So it shows respect. If you dress up a little nicer and a little more on the conservative side, depending on who these parents are, it just shows respect. And then setting refers to any physical items that we use to influence others' perception of us. So again, you're going to the house for dinner to meet the parents. Maybe bring them a little something. Bring them a little candle, a little plant, flowers. People like that. It's just a nice little gesture. Bring a little dessert or something. If get some heads up from your significant other. If they're alcoholics, don't bring a bottle of wine. But, you could use your own discretion. I'll let you figure that out for yourself, but definitely get maybe a little help from the person you're dating and to see what their parents would enjoy. So that's setting. And again, the name setting, it's just any physical item. So if you're on a job interview and you bring a resume, the resume would be considered setting. On a first date, so to be, if a guy is picking up a girl on a first date, you got to be careful these days, but if that's what you're doing, or any date, a guy, do you wash your car before the date? Well, that's identity management, washing a car before the date. When someone's coming over to your house for dinner, do you clean the house before they come? That's identity management. So you do those things like cleaning the house, cleaning your car, because you're trying to make a certain impression. So with this lecture, that's the end of the lecture. It's a short, sweet lecture, unlike the last lecture that just went on and on and on. Hi. So kind of the message of this lecture is we all have these tools at our disposal to make a good impression on someone. You can say certain things, ask questions, not say certain things. I forgot to tell you, you don't ever talk religion, politics, money with someone you don't know very well trying to make a good impression, right? You've heard that before. And I know these days that's a bit tough to dance around, but good luck. There are things you can do with your appearance. There are things you can do with physical items. A lot of times, if you just put a little preparation and thought into an event ahead of time, it does help you make a good first impression. So there are things you can do that will help you make a better impression. On the other side of that, please don't drive yourself nuts trying to be the perfect person and make the perfect impression, because that doesn't exist. And remember, yes, in certain situations, people are there to evaluate you. Maybe they're meeting you for the first time, checking you out. But if it's just a casual, you're meeting a bunch of people at a party, most people feel awkward at that anyway, and you're nothing special. You're not there in particular to be judged. So relax. and don't try so hard. Don't look like you're trying so hard. People aren't judging you every minute like you might think that they are. Okay. So this lecture is a lot, I think it goes a lot better when we're in person, because this lecture, there's a lot of discussion that typically goes on in class. So here we are at home. And so that's all I'm going to say about this lecture. Take care. Be safe. Talk to you soon. Still